Homeless, without support and holding her sick daughter in her arms, she only wanted to buy milk. But what she heard in that store changed everything, and no one was prepared for what came next. The streets of Chicago's West Side were still exhaling the last vapors of dawn when Sarah Mitchell adjusted the thin jacket over her daughter's small body. Lily, only 8 months old, shivered slightly, wrapped in a tattered blanket, the fever making her little face flushed. Sarah held her against her chest, like someone protecting what remained of the world, trying to muffle the hoarse cough that threatened to wake the few still sleeping around their improvised shelter. The shelter was little more than an awning near Michigan Avenue, protected by cardboard and tarps. It offered shade and concrete. It was what was available. It was where reality had placed her, after everything collapsed like a house of cards soaked by the rain of life. Before losing her job, Sarah had led a simple but dignified life. With a degree in business administration and a specialization in social responsibility, she had worked as a junior analyst at the Lawrence Foundation, one of the largest social impact companies in the country. She had ideas that moved people, community projects that actually changed lives. Her campaigns had made magazine covers, transforming entire neighborhoods in Chicago's outskirts. But getting pregnant alone, being abandoned by her boyfriend and having no family support network, pushed her into a silent and inexorable spiral. First came the constant absences at work. Lily cried a lot at public daycares, always sick, always needing special care. Then came the informal notice that her position had been terminated due to restructuring. Finally, eviction from her small rented apartment in Lincoln Park. With her daughter's arrival and the complete absence of Ryan Wilson, her ex-boyfriend, everything she managed to gather consisted of counted coins, borrowed blankets, and a stubborn hope that refused to die. On that cold August morning, Lily had drastically worsened. Sarah already knew well that wheezing in her chest, her daughter's vacant stare, the warm and damp skin, high fever and labored breathing, the cough that cut through the air like broken glass. There was only one thing the pediatrician at the health clinic had recommended before she lost access to the public system: a specific type of milk with hypoallergenic composition, which would ease digestive discomfort and prevent constant vomiting, common to the baby's delicate condition. The product was expensive, very expensive for someone who depended on the kindness of strangers. But Sarah had meticulously collected coins for days and days. Coins given by hurried passers-by, coins found among dry leaves on the sidewalk, coins exchanged for recycled cardboard at scrapyards in the area. Each cent had been a small victory, an accumulated hope. And now, with feverish Lily in her arms, she knew she had only one chance to get that liquid medicine that could save her daughter from another night of suffering. She went to a 24-hour pharmacy on Lakeshore Drive, one of the few that still kept that specialized infant formula in stock. The environment, illuminated by fluorescent lamps, contrasted aggressively with her worn appearance, drawing attention from eyes unaccustomed to seeing someone like her there. She felt the judgmental glances. She ignored them with the dignity she still had left. Each step to the counter was like climbing a steep hill, carrying her own history on her back. Her tattered clothes, the smell of dampness that stuck to her skin, the disheveled hair, everything screamed her condition. But she kept her head high. She had a mission. With extreme care, she placed the can of special formula on the cold counter. Beside it, she deposited a transparent plastic bag with coins carefully separated by value: oxidized pennies, scratched nickels, dollar coins worn by time and use. The attendant, a young man in a white uniform, counted the money with visible discomfort, avoiding looking her in the eyes. His hands trembled slightly while sorting the coins into groups. She was $17 short. Enough to be impossible to get. Enough to make it hurt deep in her soul. Enough to transform hope into despair. Sarah felt the world spin around her. She didn't know where to put her eyes, where to hide the shame that burned like acid. She would take Lily back in her arms, say a weak "excuse me," and leave as she entered. Ignored, invisible, defeated. The tears started to form, but she held them back with all the strength she still possessed. It was then that something broke that embarrassing silence. A male voice, firm but restrained, cut through the environment like a sharp blade. "It's okay. I'll pay the difference." Sarah didn't understand at first. She only realized that someone beside her had placed a gold credit card on the counter, and nodded to the attendant. She turned slowly and saw a tall man with an impeccable appearance and a dark Italian suit. Nothing about him screamed ostentation, but everything about him commanded presence. His hands were well cared for, his watch discreetly luxurious. His leather shoes shone even under the artificial light of the pharmacy. The attendant, clearly surprised by the turn of events, quickly processed the purchase and delivered the package into Sarah's trembling hands. She, ashamed to her core, almost refused that unexpected help, but the man's look showed no pity. It was something harder to name, a silent respect, an understanding that dispensed with words. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Hugging Lily tighter against her chest, he just nodded, putting the card back in his leather wallet. His eyes, dark and deep, lingered for a second on the baby's face before returning to Sarah. "Take good care of her," he said simply, and headed to another section of the pharmacy. Outside, the rain was starting to get heavier, turning the Chicago dawn into a watery, melancholic symphony. Sarah pulled the hood of her jacket over her daughter's head, who was coughing even more strongly, as if the cold and moisture conspired against her small lungs. She walked quickly along the uneven sidewalks, avoiding puddles, embracing Lily as if the warmth of her own body would be enough to protect her from all the evil in the world. The rain increased with each minute, transforming into a typical winter storm in Chicago. Sarah sought shelter under the awning of a closed bakery, but Lily cried louder and louder, her breathing becoming more difficult. Desperation began to take hold of her when she realized she needed urgent medical help. That's when she didn't hear the car approach slowly down the wet street. She only noticed when the window of a black sedan rolled down, revealing the same man from the pharmacy. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Need help? The voice came through the partially opened window, accompanied by the soft sound of the engine and the smell of leather and lavender escaping from the heated interior of the vehicle. Sarah hesitated, hugging Lily tighter. All her education made her distrust strangers, especially unknown men offering rides in the middle of the night. But Lily chose that moment to have a more intense coughing fit, her little body trembling violently in her mother's arms. "She needs to go to a hospital," said the man, his voice carrying genuine concern. "I can take you both. No strings attached." The rain intensified even more, as if the sky were conspiring to force a decision. Sarah looked at Lily, who was gasping with difficulty, her lips beginning to take on a worrying tone. The logic of survival won over the caution of distrust. "All right," she murmured, running toward the car. The interior of the sedan was a stark contrast to the wet world outside. The leather seat was soft and heated, the air conditioning worked perfectly, and there was even classical music playing softly on the sound system. Sarah didn't know where to put her wet hands, afraid of soiling something that clearly cost more than she had earned in months of work. "Northwestern Memorial is the closest," he said, adjusting the GPS with precise movements. "They have an excellent pediatric emergency room." She just nodded, cradling Lily, who had finally stopped crying, perhaps soothed by the warmth and smooth movement of the car. Sarah observed the man's profile as he drove. Marked but not severe features, a well-groomed beard, greying hair at the temples that gave him a distinguished air. He must have been about 40 years old, perhaps a bit more. "What's her name?" he asked after a few minutes of silence, without taking his eyes off the road. "Lily," Sarah answered, her voice still weak. "Lily Mitchell." He remained silent for a few seconds too long, as if processing some important information. Then, almost hesitantly, he asked, "And your full name?" Sarah Mitchell." The response came automatically, but she immediately wondered why she was giving so many personal details to a complete stranger. The man slightly reduced his speed, as if the words had a physical impact on him. He remained quiet for a few more seconds before speaking again, this time with contained curiosity in his voice. "You worked in social impact, didn't you? Specifically at the Lawrence Foundation?" Sarah turned completely to look at him, surprised and suspicious. How could he know that? Thousands of possibilities ran through her mind, none of them particularly comforting. "How do you know that?" she asked, instinctively holding Lily closer to her body. "I remember a Sarah Mitchell who developed revolutionary social impact campaigns a few years ago. Projects that transformed entire communities in Chicago's outskirts. He paused, navigating a tighter curve with skill. Campaigns that, if I'm not mistaken, won national awards for social responsibility. Sarah's heart raced. Those campaigns were her trademark, her professional pride, the proof that she could really change the world. But they were also the source of her greatest betrayal. The reason why her life had collapsed like a house of cards. Yes, that was me, she finally admitted, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and bitterness. But that was a long time ago. Another world, another life. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. My name is Edward. Edward Lawrence. The name fell between them like a silent bomb. Sarah felt the blood freeze in her veins. Edward Lawrence, the chairman of the Lawrence Foundation, heir to the traditional Chicago business family, one of the most respected names in the country's social responsibility sector. His photo was in the business pages of newspapers, on the covers of business magazines, at corporate events broadcast on television. And there he was, personally driving a homeless woman and her sick daughter to the hospital in Chicago's rainy dawn. You're the owner of the company where I worked, said Sarah, more as a statement than a question. I'm the chairman of the board, he gently corrected. My grandfather founded the institution 50 years ago. I grew up hearing stories about how social work can truly transform lives when done with seriousness and competence. Sarah couldn't fully process that information. It was too surreal, as if the universe were playing a joke of dubious taste on her already sufficiently complicated life. I remember your projects very well, continued Edward, stopping at a red light and finally looking directly at her. Especially the Building Hands campaign, which revitalized 3 neighborhoods on the East Side. It was brilliant, innovative, one of the best things our foundation has ever accomplished. Sarah felt a pang in her heart. The Building Hands campaign had been her masterpiece, months of research, planning, and flawless execution. It had transformed not only the communities served, but also elevated the Lawrence Foundation's prestige to a national level. It had generated invitations to international conferences, partnerships with foreign organizations, recognition in important awards, and it had been completely credited to Ryan Wilson. That campaign, Sarah began, but her voice failed. How to explain to the company president that she had been betrayed by her own boyfriend? How to tell him that Ryan had taken all the credit, using his higher hierarchical position to erase her name from the final reports? There's something about that campaign that has always bothered me, said Edward, resuming driving when the light turned green. Something that never quite added up. Sarah looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? Ryan Wilson had never demonstrated that kind of creativity before, nor after, for that matter. He was a competent employee, followed protocols, but never had truly innovative insights. Edward made a thoughtful pause. And then, out of nowhere, he presents a brilliant campaign, with a completely different approach from anything he had done before. The car stopped in the Northwestern Memorial Hospital parking lot. Edward turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. Lily had finally fallen asleep, her breathing a little calmer. You suspect it wasn't him who created the campaign, said Sarah, not as a question, but as a statement. Edward turned completely to face her. His dark eyes were intelligent, calculating, but not cold. I always knew it wasn't him. The question is, who really created it? Sarah took a deep breath. After carrying that truth alone for so long, after so much silence and humiliation, perhaps it was time to finally speak out. I did, she said simply. The entire campaign, from initial research to final execution. Ryan just signed the reports as project coordinator. Edward nodded slowly, as if an important piece of a puzzle had finally found its place. And what happened after that? He asked. Sarah looked at Lily sleeping in her arms, then at her own calloused hands, finally at the man who could have changed her life if he had known the truth at the right time. After that, I was discarded, she said with a sadness that cut like glass. And here we are. The pediatric emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital bustled with the typical activity of dawn. Edward waited patiently while Sarah went through triage with Lily, observing from a distance as she filled out forms with still elegant handwriting despite the circumstances. There was something about her posture, even wearing worn clothes and carrying a sick baby. That demonstrated unbreakable dignity. The diagnosis was not surprising. Mild pneumonia, high fever, beginning of dehydration. The pediatrician recommended hospitalization for at least 24 hours for observation and intravenous medication. Sarah signed the papers with trembling hands, knowing she had no way to pay, but willing to face any consequences to ensure her daughter's treatment. It was only when she woke up a few hours later, having fallen asleep in the chair next to Lily's crib, that she found a receipt for complete payment of the hospitalization in her pocket. Edward was still there outside the room, with cold coffee in his hands and eyes fixed on the floor, as if waiting for an answer that never came. "Why are you doing this?" asked Sarah, confronting him in the hallway. Her voice carried more curiosity than gratitude, a need to understand the motivations behind those gestures. Edward raised his eyes, showing a vulnerability that seemed out of place in a man of his position. "Because for 3 years I've watched Ryan Wilson be promoted, based on work that wasn't his. Because our company built its reputation on a lie. And because," he paused, looking in the direction of the room where Lily was sleeping, "because this is simply the right thing to do." In the following days, Edward began to appear at the hospital with a regularity that surprised even Sarah. He brought books, fruits, conversations that went far beyond social courtesy. They talked about Sarah's old projects, about her ideas for community transformation, about the philosophy behind true social impact. Sarah discovered that Edward was not just a rich heir playing at philanthropy. He had studied at the London School of Economics, specialized in sustainable social development, and truly believed in the transformative potential of the work they did. More importantly, he listened to her ideas with the attention of someone who recognizes real value. "You have a systemic vision that most professionals in the field lack," he said during one of his visits, while Lily played with a small teddy bear he had brought. "Your projects didn't just treat symptoms, they attacked structural causes." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time, professional recognition, validation of her competencies. "That's what motivated me. It wasn't enough to just give alms or do temporary charity. We needed to create systems that allowed people to build their own solutions." Edward nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And that's why the Building Hands campaign was so revolutionary. It wasn't assistentialism, it was empowerment." It was during these conversations that Sarah began to realize the extent of the personal investigation that Edward was conducting. He had reviewed all the campaign files, compared the language of the reports with Ryan's previous work, analyzed timelines and participation in meetings. "Ryan was never present during the conceptual creation phases," revealed Edward, showing a folder with meticulously organized documents. "He only appeared when the project was already structured. And even then, all his contributions were administrative, never creative." Sarah leafed through the papers, recognizing her own handwriting in margin notes. Her original ideas in drafts she thought had been destroyed. Seeing those documents was like rediscovering pieces of herself that she had given up as lost. "There's more," continued Edward, his expression becoming more serious. "I discovered that Ryan is in the final selection process for the regional directorship of our new branch in New York City, the most important position ever offered to someone his age in the company's history. And the project that most impressed the board was precisely Building Hands." Sarah felt a dull anger rise in her chest. Ryan had not only stolen her work, but was building an entire career on this lie. While she slept in shelters with her daughter in her arms, he climbed the corporate hierarchy, using her creativity and dedication as steps. "What do you intend to do with this information?" she asked, trying to keep her voice controlled. Edward carefully closed the folder. "That depends on you, Sarah. These discoveries mean nothing if you're not willing to claim what is yours." The proposal he made in the following days was both generous and challenging. The Lawrence Foundation was restructuring its social impact department, creating a new directorate specifically focused on sustainable community transformation projects. Edward wanted Sarah to take the leadership of this area, with full autonomy to develop and implement her own methodologies. "It's not charity," he emphasized during lunch at a small restaurant near the hospital, where Sarah had agreed to meet him to discuss the details. "It's an investment. You have a vision that our company desperately needs. Sarah poked at her salad without much appetite, her brain processing the implications of that offer. What about Ryan? The truth about the Building Hands campaign needs to officially come to light. Not as revenge, but as a matter of institutional integrity. Edward paused, choosing his words carefully. The company has a charity gala next month. All the main directors and coordinators will be present, including Ryan. It would be an opportunity to publicly clarify the true credits of the campaign. The idea of publicly confronting Ryan made Sarah's stomach turn. She had spent so much time hiding, diminishing herself, accepting invisibility as an inevitable fate, that the prospect of reclaiming her space seemed almost impossible. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "It's been so long since I've accepted being ignored that I don't know how to fight anymore." Edward leaned toward her, his dark eyes intense but gentle. "Sarah, you've spent the last few months fighting for your daughter's life in the most adverse conditions possible. You faced hunger, cold, humiliation, and yet maintained your dignity. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." She looked out the restaurant window, observing people walking hurriedly on the sidewalk, each carrying their own burdens and dreams. Lily was better, playing on her lap with a smile that lit up the whole table. Perhaps it was time to show her daughter that the Mitchell women didn't give up without a fight. "If I accept," Sarah finally said, "I want it done the right way. No favoritism or protectionism. I want to prove that I deserve the position through my work, not through circumstances." Edward smiled for the first time since they had met, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. "I wouldn't expect anything different from you." They spent the rest of lunch discussing practical details. Sarah would need time to reorganize, find adequate housing, prepare a formal presentation about her vision for the new department. Edward offered logistical help, but respected the boundaries she established. "There's one last thing," said Edward as they prepared to leave. "I would like you to consider attending the gala as our new director. It would be your first official appearance at the company." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach, but also a flame of determination that she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Will Ryan be there?" she asked. "Ryan will be there," confirmed Edward, "and he'll finally know that the days of appropriating others' work have come to an end." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of changes that Sarah still had difficulty believing were real. Edward had kept his word. No favors, no protectionism. The help he offered was practical and respectful, allowing her to maintain her dignity while rebuilding her life. The first step was finding housing. Sarah categorically refused Edward's suggestion of an apartment in an upscale neighborhood. Instead, she chose a small 2-bedroom in Wicker Park, close to public transportation and with a good quality daycare nearby. It was simple, but it was hers. For the first time in months, Lily slept in a real crib in a room with proper heating. During the days, Sarah immersed herself in preparation for her new role. Edward had given her access to the Foundation's historical archives, and she spent hours studying previous projects, identifying patterns, analyzing results. It was like becoming herself again, the dedicated professional, the social visionary, the woman who genuinely believed in the transformative power of communities. But it was during this intensive research that Sarah discovered the true extent of Ryan's betrayal. It hadn't been just the Building Hands campaign. Throughout the 3 years since her departure from the company, he had systematically appropriated other ideas and projects developed by different employees, always using his hierarchical position to sign as the main author. "Look at this," said Sarah during a meeting with Edward in his office, spreading documents across the mahogany desk. The Seeds of the Future project, credited entirely to Ryan last year, was actually conceived by an intern named Maria Henderson. She developed the entire urban agriculture methodology in disadvantaged communities. Edward examined the papers with growing attention. "And what happened to Maria?" "Fired 3 months after the project's completion, officially due to cost-cutting." Sarah flipped through more documents. "Here's another. Digital Bridges, the technology inclusion program that gave the Foundation the National Award last year. The original idea came from an analyst named Frank Carter. Ryan took over leadership when the project began to gain visibility." "Does Frank still work for the company?" asked Edward, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Transferred to an administrative department with no relevance. Basically forgotten. Sarah gathered the papers with precise movements. Edward, this isn't just about me. Ryan has built an entire career destroying other careers. The investigation revealed a systematic pattern. Ryan identified emerging talents in the company, approached them during the development of innovative projects, and then used his position to take credit as soon as the results proved promising. The true creators were marginalized, transferred, or dismissed, while he accumulated recognition and promotions. How many people do you think he's harmed? Asked Edward during a walk through Grant Park, where they had decided to meet to discuss the findings away from the corporate environment. Sarah pushed Lily's stroller, who played happily with a small stuffed elephant. I've been able to identify at least 7 clear cases in the last 5 years. There are probably more that we haven't yet discovered. Edward stopped walking, observing a family having a picnic on the grass. This goes far beyond a personal issue between you two. It's a matter of the company's institutional integrity. What do you plan to do? What should have been done a long time ago? A complete formal investigation. Edward resumed walking, his long strides forcing Sarah to quicken her pace. I've already spoken with the legal department. They're reviewing all projects led by Ryan over the past 5 years. The prospect of an official investigation brought Sarah a mixture of relief and anxiety. On one hand, there would finally be justice. On the other, it meant her story would become public, that she would need to publicly relive the worst moments of her life. What if this harms my credibility in the new position? She asked, showing a vulnerability that she rarely allowed to show through. Edward stopped the stroller and turned to face her directly. Sarah, you survived months of extreme adversity while keeping your integrity intact. You cared for your daughter alone in the most difficult conditions imaginable. You developed projects that changed real lives. If someone questions your credibility, that someone is clearly mistaken. In the days leading up to the gala, Sarah dedicated herself intensively to preparing her official presentation as the new director. She wanted to make it clear to everyone present that she had been hired on her own merit, not through personal circumstances or corporate sentimentalism. She worked 16 hours a day developing a revolutionary proposal for the new social impact department. Her approach combined rigorous academic methodology with practical experience of someone who intimately knew the needs of vulnerable communities. It was ambitious without being unrealistic, innovative without dismissing traditions that worked. This is impressive, said Edward, after reviewing the complete project. You're not just proposing social programs. You're creating a new paradigm of corporate responsibility. Sarah smiled, feeling for the first time in a long time the professional pride she had lost. I've learned that real social impact doesn't happen when companies do charity to feel good about themselves. It happens when we recognize that our business success is intrinsically linked to the well-being of the communities where we operate. The gala would be held at the Four Seasons, one of Chicago's most elegant hotels. Sarah had chosen a discreet but elegant dress, navy blue that conveyed professionalism without ostentation. Edward had insisted that she bring Lily, arguing that her motherhood was an integral part of her identity and should not be hidden in a professional context. Working mothers face unique challenges in the corporate environment, he said. Showing that our company not only accepts but celebrates motherhood is an important message. On the eve of the gala, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Maria Henderson, the former intern whose project had been appropriated by Ryan. Sarah, Edward Lawrence contacted me, said Maria, her voice charged with emotion. He told me about the investigation and about your new position. I wanted to thank you for giving visibility to what happened to me. Maria, I'm so sorry for what you went through, Sarah responded sincerely, and I want you to know that if you accept, I'd like to invite you to join my team in the new department. The silence on the other end of the line was long, broken only by a muffled sob. You would really do that? After everything? You have talent and were treated unjustly. Our department needs people like you who understand both the technical and human aspects of social work. When they hung up, Sarah felt a sense of completeness that she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't just rebuilding her own career. She was creating opportunities for other marginalized talents to flourish. On the morning of the gala, while getting Lily ready to take her to daycare before preparing for the event, Sarah reflected on the surreal journey she had traveled. A month ago, she was counting coins to buy milk. Now she was about to publicly assume one of the most important positions of her professional career. But more than that, she was about to confront the man who had tried to erase her professional existence in front of the people who mattered most in the sector. And this time she would not be silenced. The Four Seasons gleamed in the Chicago night, its illuminated facades reflecting in the puddles left by the afternoon rain. Sarah paused on the sidewalk in front of the hotel, observing the movement of elegantly dressed people entering and exiting the main lobby. Journalists, business people, third sector personalities, all gathered for the most important charity gala of the year. She took a deep breath, adjusting the blazer over the navy blue dress she had carefully chosen. Lily was safe with the babysitter Edward had kindly arranged, a trusted woman who would take care of the girl during the night. Sarah wanted to be completely present for this moment that would define not only her professional future, but her ability to face the past with her head held high. "Are you ready?" Edward's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He appeared at her side, impeccable in a tuxedo that enhanced his natural elegance. "Honestly, I don't know if anyone can be ready for something like this," Sarah replied, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "But I'm determined." Edward offered his arm, a chivalrous gesture that she accepted with gratitude. "Remember, you're not here to justify yourself. You're here to claim what has always been yours." The hotel lobby was a symphony of marble, crystal, and whispered conversations. Sarah recognized several faces: directors from other foundations, journalists specialized in social responsibility, business people whose photos regularly appeared in the business pages of newspapers. Some looked at her with curiosity, probably wondering who this unknown woman on Edward Lawrence's arm was. "Sarah." A familiar voice made her turn. It was Helen Reynolds, her former colleague at the Lawrence Foundation, now a special projects coordinator. "My God, it's been so long. Are you okay?" The question carried multiple layers. Helen clearly knew about the circumstances of Sarah's departure from the company, probably had heard rumors about her subsequent situation, but there was genuine concern in her voice. "I'm fine, Helen, very well, actually." Sarah smiled sincerely. "And you? How are things at the foundation?" "Good, but—" Helen lowered her voice, looking around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Sarah, there are very strange rumors circulating. Something about an internal investigation, review of old projects. People are nervous." Before Sarah could respond, Edward approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Helen, good to see you. I hope you're curious about the announcements we'll be making tonight." Helen looked from Edward to Sarah, clearly trying to decipher the dynamic between them. "Announcements?" "Oh, you'll find out soon," said Edward with an enigmatic smile. "If you'll excuse us, I need to introduce Sarah to some important people." The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions and strategic conversations. Edward made a point of introducing Sarah as our new Director of Sustainable Social Impact, observing the reactions of surprise and curiosity this generated. Sarah navigated the conversations with the professional skills she had developed over the years, discussing methodologies, sector trends, contemporary challenges of social work. It was during one of these conversations, while explaining her vision of community development to a group of investors interested in social responsibility, that she saw him. Ryan Wilson was on the other side of the room, as elegant as ever, surrounded by a small group of admirers who hung on his every word. He gestured animatedly, probably telling some story about his professional successes. He was thinner than Sarah remembered, with some expression lines that didn't exist before, but he maintained the seductive charm that had always been his trademark. For a moment, Sarah felt her stomach turn. Uninvited memories returned, the nights working together on projects, the sense of intellectual partnership she had confused with love, the morning she discovered she was pregnant, and the afternoon when he simply disappeared from her life without a word of farewell. "You've seen him," Edward observed discreetly, appearing at her side. "I have," Sarah confirmed, her voice firmer than she imagined it would be. "And you know something?" "He seems smaller than I remembered." Edward smiled. "That happens when we stop looking at people from bottom to top." The moment of greatest tension came when Ryan finally noticed her. Sarah saw the exact instant when he recognized her. His eyes widened. The champagne glass stopped midway to his lips. His expression went through a rapid sequence of surprise, confusion, and something that could be described as controlled panic. He excused himself from the group around him and walked deliberately in her direction, each step calculated as if it were a chess move. "Sarah," he said when he got close enough, his voice loaded with false cordiality. "What an unexpected surprise to see you here." "Ryan," she responded simply, keeping her tone neutral. "Are you, well?" he asked, his eyes discreetly scanning her appearance, probably noticing the changes that the difficult last few months had left. "I heard you went through some difficulties." The condescension in his voice, the way he chose the word difficulties, as if it were something minor, ignited a flame of anger that Sarah had kept carefully controlled. "I went through some experiences that gave me a very interesting perspective on loyalty, integrity, and responsibility," she replied, each word chosen with surgical precision. Ryan seemed uncomfortable for the first time. "Sarah, about our personal history, I hope you understand that Our personal history no longer interests me, Ryan," Sarah interrupted him. "But our professional history, that interests me very much." Edward, who had discreetly stepped away during the initial greetings, returned with an expression that left no doubt about his intentions. "Ryan, good to see you. I was just thinking of looking for you. We have some things to discuss." "Edward, always a pleasure," said Ryan, extending his hand with the political smile that Sarah knew so well. "I hope you're satisfied with the results we've been achieving." "Oh, I'm very interested in the results, yes," replied Edward, without accepting the handshake. "Especially in understanding exactly how those results were achieved." Ryan's discomfort was almost palpable now. His eyes alternated between Sarah and Edward, clearly trying to understand the dynamics of the situation. "I don't understand what you mean," he said, but his voice had lost part of its initial confidence. It was then that the Master of Ceremonies announced that the official pronouncements would begin in 5 minutes. Sarah felt her heart race. The moment had arrived. "Ryan," said Edward, his voice assuming an official tone that made several people nearby turn in their direction. "I hope you enjoy today's speech. It will be very enlightening." Sarah watched Ryan move away, his steps less sure than before, his posture slightly curved, as if carrying an invisible weight. She knew that in the next few minutes her life would completely change, but so would his. And for the first time in a long time, she cared much more about her own transformation than about the destruction of the one who had betrayed her. "Ready?" asked Edward, offering his arm again. Sarah took a deep breath, thought of Lily sleeping safely at home, thought of Maria and all the other talents who had been silenced, thought of the strong woman she had become during the most difficult months of her life. "More than ready," she replied, and headed toward the stage where finally her voice would be heard. The main hall of the Four Seasons had been transformed into an elegant auditorium, with rows of upholstered chairs facing a stage decorated with the colors of the Lawrence Foundation. About 300 people occupied their seats, business people, journalists, representatives from other social organizations, all waiting for the pronouncements that traditionally marked the company's annual gala. Sarah took her place in the first row, next to Edward and other directors of the foundation. Her heart was racing, but her hands were steady. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, even without knowing it would come. The Master of Ceremonies, a journalist known for his elegance and professionalism, took the stage to begin the official pronouncements. First came the traditional directors, presenting figures from the last year, announcing new partnerships, celebrating achievements already known to all present. Sarah discreetly observed Ryan, seated 3 rows behind. He had completely lost the confident pose from the beginning of the night. His hands drummed nervously on the armchair. His eyes couldn't fix on a specific point, and she could see small drops of sweat on his forehead, despite the perfect air conditioning in the room. "And now," announced the Master of Ceremonies, "we invite our chairman of the board, Edward Lawrence, to make a very special announcement about the future of our foundation." Edward took the stage with the natural elegance that characterized him, but Sarah noticed a different intensity in his posture. He adjusted the microphone, looked directly at the audience, and began to speak with a clear and firm voice. "Good evening. It's always an honor to be here with you. celebrating not only our results but our ongoing commitment to real social transformation in our country. Strategic pause, gaze sweeping across the audience. Tonight I want to talk about something fundamental to our integrity as an institution, the due recognition of those who truly create the impact we celebrate. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Ryan had turned visibly pale. In recent months, our foundation has conducted a complete review of our most successful projects from the past 5 years. What we discovered was both disappointing and inspiring. Edward made another pause, allowing the tension to build in the environment. Whispered conversations began to spread among the guests. Disappointing, because we discovered systematic cases of misappropriation of intellectual credits within our own organization, revolutionary projects that changed entire communities, that won national awards that elevated our reputation, were presented as the creation of people who in fact never participated in their conception or development. A louder murmur swept through the auditorium. Ryan abruptly stood up from his chair and began walking toward the exit. But Edward continued, his voice becoming firmer. But it was also inspiring, because it allowed us to identify the true talents that were unjustly marginalized, people whose creativity and dedication were stolen, but who maintained their integrity and passion for social work even in the most adverse circumstances. Ryan had stopped in the middle of the side aisle, realizing that his sudden exit was drawing even more attention to himself. Tonight, it is with great satisfaction that I announce the creation of our new Department of Sustainable Social Impact, dedicated exclusively to long-term community transformation projects. Edward gestured in Sarah's direction. And I want to introduce you to the director of this department, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah felt her legs wobble as she stood up. 300 pairs of eyes turned to her, but this time she didn't feel the urge to hide. She walked to the stage with firm steps, each movement carrying the dignity she had reclaimed. Sarah Mitchell, continued Edward as she climbed the steps, is the true creator of the Building Hands campaign, a project we consider our greatest achievement in recent years. She is also the visionary behind several other initiatives that were erroneously credited to other employees. Sarah reached the microphone. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. She could see familiar faces in the audience. Helen with an expression of surprise and understanding. Journalists with open notebooks ready to record every word. Business people leaning forward in their chairs. And Ryan, standing in the aisle like a pillar of salt, unable to leave or return to his seat. "Good evening," began Sarah, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. "A few months ago, I was counting coins hoping to buy milk for my sick daughter. Not because I had chosen a difficult life, but because I had chosen to remain honest even when it cost me everything." She paused, allowing her words to resonate in the room. Social work isn't about temporary charity or gestures that make companies feel good about themselves. It's about recognizing that our society only works when each person has the opportunity to contribute their unique talents. It's about creating systems that enable people to build their own solutions, not just receive passive help. Sarah looked directly at Ryan, who had finally returned to his seat but kept his eyes on the floor. "For years, I had my ideas stolen, my work appropriated, my voice silenced. But I learned something important during the most difficult months of my life. Our dignity doesn't depend on others' recognition. Our strength doesn't come from positions or titles. Our capacity for impact isn't diminished when others try to make us invisible." The audience was completely silent, absorbing every word. "What I propose for our new department is simple. We will identify and empower the true talents that exist in our communities. We will create real opportunities, not assistentialism. We will measure our success not by the awards we win, but by the lives we truly transform." Sarah took a deep breath before continuing with the part she knew would change everything. "And we will do this with complete transparency. All projects we develop will have clearly identified authorship. All employees who contribute will be properly credited, because I believe a serious organization cannot build its reputation on the silenced work of others." The ovation began slowly, with some people clapping hesitantly, but it quickly spread across the auditorium, transforming into a round of applause that lasted several minutes. Sarah remained on stage, not with the arrogance of someone triumphing over enemies, but with the serenity of someone who finally found her voice. When the ovation diminished, Edward returned to the microphone. I would also like to announce that our foundation is conducting a formal investigation into all issues raised tonight. Employees who were wronged will have the opportunity to have their contributions properly recognized, and those responsible for misappropriation of credits will face the appropriate consequences. Sarah saw Ryan definitely stand up and head for the exit. This time she felt neither anger nor satisfaction. She felt something closer to pity, sorry for a man who had built an entire life on lies and now would have to face the truth. After the speeches, the party continued with lively conversations, networking, and celebrations. Sarah was approached by dozens of people, journalists wanting interviews, business people interested in partnerships, young professionals seeking inspiration. Helen hugged her with tears in her eyes, apologizing for not realizing what was happening years ago. But the most emotional moment came when Maria Henderson approached, accompanied by Frank Carter and 3 other former Foundation employees who had also had their work appropriated by Ryan. "Sarah," said Maria, "we want to know if that offer to join your team is still open." "For all of you," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We're going to build something truly special together." When the party began to wind down, Edward approached Sarah, who was on the hotel terrace observing the city lights. "How do you feel?" he asked. Sarah smiled, thinking of Lily sleeping at home waiting for her. "I feel like I've finally returned to being myself, but a stronger, wiser version." "And about Ryan?" Sarah took a few seconds to answer. "Ryan made his choices. Now he'll have to live with the consequences. But I'm no longer going to let his story define mine." 6 months later, the Department of Sustainable Social Impact at the Lawrence Foundation had become a national reference. Sarah led a team of 15 professionals, all properly credited for their work, developing projects that truly transformed communities. Lily, now almost 2 years old, attended an excellent daycare and was growing up seeing her mother as an example of a strong and honest woman. Ryan had been fired from the foundation and faced legal processes related to intellectual property misappropriation. His career in the sector was effectively over, but Sarah rarely thought about him. She was too busy